Hi, and welcome to another vlog about the say-do gap. Why is it some people say something and then go and do something else? And in this series, I'm taking you through some of the more interesting elements of psychology as to why that can be the case. And I want to start today by getting you to do a little bit of a task. So what I want you to do is to hold your hands, grip together like this, and then raise your index fingers. And now what I want you to do is squeeze really hard, even with your thumbs as well, really hard with your fingers. Try and keep these two index fingers apart, but you'll find they gradually want to come together, but try keeping them apart, but eventually they'll come together like that. Now I'll come on to that in a second, what I was doing. But today, I want to talk about hypnosis. Now, I'm sure many of you know about hypnosis. I'm sure many of you may have even seen kind of stage hypnotists, but it's a hugely interesting phenomenon and something that can inform us as researchers. But it's massively misrepresented and massively misunderstood. Because I'm sure you've been to go and see people who've seen stage hypnotists or seen the kind of act that they do, where they get people on stage and they put them into some kind of hypnotic state and they get them to kind of do silly things, and it's very entertaining. But in effect, these people are performers. They're not really scientists or psychologists, and they don't really understand the kind of science behind what's going on. And it's represented also, people try and represent it as being some kind of special ability that they've got. And they genuinely don't have that. It's just something that some people are able to do. We'll come on to this. So what is it? Well, hypnosis has a really long history of being massively misrepresented. So we know about the word mesmerized. We can be mesmerized by something. Well, this actually comes from a guy called Anton Mesmer. He was around in the late 1700s, and he would go around the courts of Europe, basically kind of performing, but involving the people of the court in a kind of sort of a quack remedy, quack kind of sort of sessions where he'd kind of heal them of various ills. But in effect, he was using hypnosis. And what he would do, he would get people in and he would sort of entrance them with animal magnetism, and he would then put them into this trance and then do things. And actually he got into a lot of trouble because a lot of what he did involved laying his hands on the people his clients, his people he was meant to be looking after. And a lot of them tended to be quite sort of young, attractive ladies, including people like Marie Antoinette. And he ended up touching them in kind of very inappropriate places that would probably get him put on a register these days, and quite rightly. And a lot of the nobility found this rather disturbing and annoying. So what they did was they got a selection of very, very famous famous scientists around to come and try and debunk everything he was doing, including people like Benjamin Franklin. And this was actually Louis XVI, the King of France, did this. So he got Benjamin Franklin and the soon to be much more famous for his execution device, his humane execution device, Joseph Guillotine, to basically sort of test out what he was doing. And he came back saying, yeah, it's bunk. It's not true. Well, it wasn't quite true, because there is some truth to it. Well, in that case then, what is hypnosis? Well, go back to what I was doing with the hands. So basically, if you squeeze as hard as you can, like that, you can keep your fingers apart as long as possible. You possibly can. There is no force pulling your fingers together. But because I suggested it to you, about 10% of you would have felt a really, really strong force pulling your fingers together. You are people who are very hypnotically suggestible. About 80% of people, most people, have some kind of feeling of the sense there is something that feels it's kind of, pulling it together. And 10% of people just have absolutely nothing. They go, yeah, I don't know what you're talking about. And that's the real key to it, is there are just some people, the majority of us have some sense of this, but there are some people who are just really, really suggestible. And you can suggest things to them, and they will actually have these astonishing physical experiences of the thing that you're suggesting. And these are the people that, that little test I did is the kind of test, if you go and see a stage hypnotist, they'll do a test like that to try and find out who are the most hypnotically suggestible people. And they're the ones that get up on stage, and then they'll weed them out to the ones who are kind of not only suggestible, but also willing to sort of put a bit of a show on for the audience. So they're just very talented, they're very entertaining, but I think it does massively misrepresent what hypnosis is. It's just this weird phenomenon where people become some people become really suggestible. There's no skill in hypnosis. Anybody who is hypnotized can be hypnotized by anything. They can hypnotize themselves just staring at a dot on the wall. There's no skill in actually being a hypnotist. Anybody can do it. But it's just this very strange phenomenon. And when they get people on stage and they put them in a hypnotic state and they say, I'm going to give you a lovely apple and it's actually an onion, they will have the sensation of tasting apple, which is extraordinary. And the even weirder thing is that nobody knows why this is the case. Nobody's actually worked this out yet. But this sort of affects us in the sense of the way in which we can perceive certain phenomena in the world. So you can see it in different parts of the world. So for example, in the Far East, they often talk about, martial artists often talk about chi, the inner force energy that they have. And you can see them, they kind of get this ball of chi and they can hold it and feel it and it feels like a real thing. And then they can throw it at people. And some masters can knock people down using this. But of course, this is probably better explained using hypnotic suggestion than actually there being a force that's being thrown at somebody. In the same way that if you go to some evangelical churches in America, they can do that kind of healing thing where you know the power of whatever it is, and they touch people and they fall down. And that you can even see these preachers who can knock over whole audiences. And again, there's still probably some mass hysteria thing going on as well there, but again, it's much more explainable using hypnotic suggestion, saying that these people, they get up, are just very suggestible and very easily suggested that if there's a force that's going to knock them down, they will have that experience and they will have that sensation of being knocked over. So what's this got to do with research? Well, there's some very interesting kind of effects that you can see using these kind of principles. I mean, it's less, so this hypnosis is the extreme example, but there are other examples as well where suggesting or framing in terms of cognitive science and behavioral economics actually can have a profound effect on what we experience. So, for example, an experiment was done not that long ago where people were asked to come and taste a new beer, or a beer, and one group was told, we've put some balsamic vinegar in that beer, and they drank it and went, that's horrible, that beer's got balsamic vinegar in. But if you suggested to them that it was a flavour enhancer, something that was going to improve the experience, lo and behold, far more people, and the majority kind of went, yeah, that does taste quite interesting, I quite like that. So again, it's not just about framing, it's about actually the way that you suggest things to people does have this very, very strong effect on how they perceive it. I mean, there are lots of examples of this, lots of examples with food. For example, strawberry mousse is always perceived to taste better on a white plate than on any other plate. And a lot of this is kind of, it's not as extreme as hypnotic suggestion, but there is something called non-hypnotic suggestion, which is probably, basically framing where all these effects can happen. So as researchers, what we need to do is understand that we can't take things in isolation. We have to take things in context. So we kind of know that, working with augmented reality, we work with brands who kind of send out samples to people, but we know that creating a kind of a realistic context for that sample is important because it is going to basically work in a way that will affect the way people perceive it. So that's the kind of work that we tend to try to do with augmented reality, is give people a really good context to be able to understand what the product is going to be like, the actual product experience is. And it's quite profound the way in which that can be changed. So thank you very much for listening, and I hope you join me again for another talk about the say-do gap. Thank you.